Hi, I'm Danielle Coslow, and I'm in Mr. O'Reilly's third period class. My project is on Ben Franklin's final speech at the Constitution Convention in Philadelphia, which was obviously written by Ben Franklin. So first we're going to learn a little bit about Ben Franklin. He was born on January 17th, 1706, in Boston, Massachusetts. He was the 10th of 17 children in his family, and was best known as being a printer, a scientist, a politician, and a statesman. He dropped out of school at a very young age in order to pursue a career as a printer's apprentice under his older brother. One of Franklin's many passions was to read and write, and he published the Poor Richard's Almanac under the name Richard Saunders, which sold out about 10,000 copies a year. He also founded the first lending library, which was the Library Company of Philadelphia, and the first volunteer fire department, which was the volunteer fire department of Philadelphia. As one of the leading scientists of his time, Franklin developed the Franklin stove, which is a type of stove, a lightning rod, and bifocals, which are used in glasses. In the world of politics, Franklin was elected to the Second Continental Congress for Pennsylvania, and was on the Committee of Five who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He also served as the first United States ambassador to France. As the ambassador to France, he was one of the main factors that convinced the French to sign the Treaty of Alliance, which said that they allied with us during the war and helped us win against the British. He was also one of the prime negotiators for the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War. Franklin retired after the Revolutionary War and getting the Treaty of Paris signed, but came out of retirement to represent Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention. And he wrote a very persuasive speech, which we will be analyzing soon, to help the Constitution get signed and ultimately ratified. Franklin was not alive to see much of the new government under the Constitution, however, because he died on April 17, 1790, but approximately 20,000 people attended his funeral. Before the Revolution, Franklin wrote the Albany Plan of Union in order to unite all 13 colonies against Britain. The plan called for each colony sending representatives to the Grand Council, which had the authority to raise taxes, declare treaties, and raise an army. So basically, it was a very similar government to the one that was going to be created under the Constitution, other than the different houses. Like, this is very similar to the Congress, And this was extremely significant because it showed Franklin wanted a central government all along, even when most people thought that a government controlling all the colonies would be insane and against their rights. So now let's talk a little bit about the time period, which was around 1787, so from the 1780s to 1787. During this time, Americans were beginning to see that the Articles of Confederation, which was their plan of government at the time, was not a sufficient form of government and gave too little power to the federal government. The federal government could only raise taxes if the states agreed unanimously to tax their citizens, which no state would ever do because they didn't want to tax their citizens. This ended up leading to the government not being able to pay the army, which led to a conspiracy amongst soldiers called the Newburgh Conspiracy, and it also led to Shays' Rebellion because the frontier farmers, including Daniel Shays, who was a frontier farmer, rebelled because they were not getting soldiers to help protect them from Indians. And France and Spain stopped lots of their trade with the United States because we did not have enough money to pay them back after the war. In response to these problems, Congress decided to hold a meeting in order to change the Articles of Confederation. And this meeting was in Philadelphia, so it's known as the Philadelphia Convention or the Constitutional Convention. And at this meeting, none of the states could really agree on certain matters, such as how many slaves to count in the population for tax purposes, or how the number of congressmen would be chosen from each state. Because of this, the framers of the Constitution had to make compromises, like the 3/5 Compromise, which basically said 3 out of every 5 slaves would be taxed, and the Connecticut Plan, which said that there would be a Senate and a House of Representatives, House being accounted for by population, and the Senate having equal votes. Many framers were unhappy with these compromises, even though they were pretty fair, and they were considering not signing the Constitution and even complaining to their states so they wouldn't ratify. Ben Franklin wrote his final speech in order to convince all of the framers of the Constitution to sign and not to talk about it negatively to the citizens, because that could sway their votes and their mindsets. And even though Benjamin Franklin wrote this document, he actually had another representative from Pennsylvania read the document, James Wilson. So now let's go on to analyze the document. Many delegates of the Constitution Convention didn't agree with the Constitution, either because it gave too much power to the government or because they felt that the compromises that the Constitution offered were not useful. The controversy regarding the compromises was addressed when Franklin wrote, "I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure that I shall never approve them. For having lived long, I have experienced many instances of being obliged to change opinions, even on important subjects, which I once thought right, but found to be otherwise. It is therefore that the older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my judgment, and to pay more respect to the judgment of others." Franklin was implying slavery as one of the parts of the Constitution that he did not personally approve, and the compromises regarding slavery, such as the 3/5 Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Act. And although Franklin was completely against slavery and just wanted the whole institution to be demolished or abolished, he had to allow slavery to continue in the Constitution in order to get the southern states to sign the Constitution and ratify. He also used his age to imply that his longer life gave him the wisdom to be more receptive to new ideas and change, which would have resonated well with some of the delegates of the Constitution Convention. He also used some of his personal ideas, experiences, and events of the time period in order to convince the delegates of the convention to sign the Constitution. Franklin used religion as a technique when he wrote, "Most sects and religions think themselves that wherever others differ from them, it is so far error. Steele, a Protestant, in a dedication, tells the Pope that the only difference in our churches in their opinions of the certainty of their doctrines is, the Church of Rome is infallible, and the Church of England is never in the wrong." He was basically stating that all religions believe that they have the right answer to God and that they are the chosen people, when clearly that can't always be the case, because if everybody thinks that, then somebody has to be wrong. But Franklin specifically used the Church of England as the church that was considered infallible, because the majority of Americans at the time and at the convention were Protestants of English descent. This made Franklin and his ideas seem more relatable to the delegates, so they would subconsciously become more likely to listen to Franklin's ideas. Another example, which was a reflection of personal experiences and the time period, was few express infallibility so naturally as a certain French lady, who once said, "I don't know how it happened, sister, but I meet with nobody but myself that's always in the right." So he's basically saying the same idea that he had with a religion comment. Certain people will always see themselves as right and everybody else as wrong, when this, again, clearly cannot always be the case. At the time of the Philadelphia Convention, there was much tension between the United States and France, as the French had ended much of their trade with the United States and charged high taxes on French goods. Franklin was using sarcasm by saying the French woman was always right, because the Americans clearly thought otherwise of the French at the time. So he used this mechanism of humor to make him appear more likable, and as he was already a pretty witty and funny guy, people were more likely to listen to his speech, especially because they could be thinking that there could be other funny quips in there somewhere. And more people would listen to a humorous speech that has certain funny jokes, or what they consider jokes about it, than dull speeches. Although discussing current events in Franklin's final speech was an effective way to get his point across, writing about past events that had affected the country many years before was also a prominent way to get delegates to listen to Franklin about why the United States needed to end the Articles of Confederation and replace it with a constitution. The American Revolution and the events that transpired prior to the Revolutionary War led a major impact on American ideology. Franklin hinted at this while writing, I think a general government necessary for us, and there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered, and believe further that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years, and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, shall be incapable of any other. Now, despotism, in case you didn't know, is when an absolute monarch or an oligarchy takes over. So, like King Louis XVII or Napoleon could both be considered despotic rules. So Franklin was saying that by sticking with the current weak government that was created under the Articles of Confederation, the government would eventually be taken over by a cruel dictator, which is very similar to how King George III was during the American Revolution. And he actually used the persuasive technique of logos, which is appealing to the logic of oneself or the audience, was used because it is pretty logical to say that a weak government is easy to take over. So having a weak central government that is as weak as the one created under the Articles of Confederation could quickly just dissolve if a coup d'etat were to occur. Also, the Articles of Confederation made it virtually impossible for the federal government to raise funds to start an army. So they would be completely unprepared to fight a rebellion of any kind, which is actually proven through Shays' Rebellion, because they weren't able to help the farmers out with the issues with the Native Americans. One of the last parts of Franklin's speech was a plea to the delegates not to make derogatory comments about the Constitution in their states during ratification. And he quoted this best by saying, I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it's not the best. I sacrifice my opinions to the public good. If every one of us, in returning to our constituents, were to report the objections he has had to it, and endeavor to gain partisans in support of them, we might prevent its being generally received, and thereby lose all salutary effects and great advantages resulting naturally in our favor from our real or apparent unanimity. So he's basically saying, if you guys are telling all of your citizens in your states that the Constitution's a bad idea, they're not going to vote for it, and we're going to be stuck under the Articles of Confederation government, which is going to keep us from being completely unified as we should be. And as the Americans looked up to the delegates they chose to send, they saw these delegates as having the best opinions on political issues. And a negative remark made by the delegates, as I said, could have compromised the ratification of the Constitution. Franklin knew this and addressed it so that the framers would not sway the Americans' votes. Franklin's speech could be considered a success, I would say. It has a mild success rate, because 39 of 55 delegates did decide to sign the Constitution, which was enough for it to get passed on to the states. The ratification process within each state became rather difficult, though, specifically because most states wanted to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution before signing it. And basically, the Federalists who were for the Constitution decided that, yeah, a Bill of Rights wouldn't hurt. It could help a lot, actually. So they told the rest of the states that the first order of business would be to draft the Bill of Rights, which they did. They drafted it as soon as it was signed, or not signed, completely ratified, which happened in September on the 25th of 1789. Congress approved 12 amendments at the time to the Constitution, and 10 of them took effect as the Bill of Rights 2 years later. And around 1789, the new government, which was that of the Constitution, was put in place as it needed 9 out of 13 states to ratify. And the last one, or the 9th one, was New Hampshire. The Constitution itself allowed the United States central government to collect taxes, which allowed them to pay back their foreign debts and their army. So trade was beginning to pick up slowly again with France after the debts were being paid or starting to be paid off. The central government could hold an army now in case of troubles with Native Americans on the frontier. So this document did help get the Constitution signed, and that was Franklin's primary goal. So, yes, that's all there really is to the document. Thanks for watching.